Give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's. I always enjoy and acknowledge the many translations that we have of the Bible, but call me old-fashioned when it comes to this particular verse in Matthew's Gospel, because I grew up hearing the verse said this way: render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God. So for the purpose of my sermon today, I'm going to use this older translation. I hate to begin a sermon on this first Sunday with all of you to kind of remind you of this, but I think we all know what happens every year on April the 15th. Again, I don't want to remind you prematurely of that, but also I want to kind of put it in context that April the 15th is not only, of course, as we know, the due date for income taxes in this country, but also on April 15th in 1912 was the day that the ship, the Titanic, sank, and the day in 1865 when President Abraham Lincoln died as a result of an assassin's bullet. So maybe our good government in its wisdom picked this very kind of black day for us to send in our taxes. But also we have to acknowledge it's not bad for everybody, because maybe if you have a birthday or wedding anniversary, it's not so bad for you. Well, someone once said that you may not agree with every department of the government, but you have to really hand it to the IRS. Someone else said death and taxes may always be with us, but at least death doesn't get worse every time Congress meets. And then finally, someone else said the Eiffel Tower is the Empire State Building after taxes. Well, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands today of the people out here who may actually enjoy paying taxes. I think we know as it's our civic responsibility, and therefore we just do it. And with our current government embroiled in the current economic challenges that face us as a nation, maybe we as Christians might find it helpful to see what Jesus might have to say about who should pay taxes and maybe how much tax we should pay. But on second thought, deserving and acknowledging how hot this topic is, that might just probably get him killed again, so we won't do that. The truth is, in the Gospels, Jesus really doesn't say a whole lot about taxation or effective participation in a political system. We have to remember, he was a Roman subject, and that left him really with not a whole lot of choices. Back in Jesus' time, the people had to pay their taxes to a government that they despised, Rome. And the Roman emperor, Caesar, ruled their land, and Roman military troops occupied their homeland to keep the order. And a portion of every person's income ended in Caesar's pocket, and this made the Jews very, very unhappy. They were a proud people, and they resented all of this Roman domination. So thus, Jesus had a real dilemma when he was asked this question: is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Now, he could offend his fellow Jews by siding with the despised Romans, or he could risk the wrath of Rome by siding with the Jews. When Jesus looked at that Roman coin and said, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God, that was not a political statement. He was concerned about what comes first in a person's life. So let me take a moment and describe the actual coin that Jesus was looking at. It was a silver coin. It was called a denarius. And it showed an image of Caesar's head, and it bore a Latin inscription underneath which translated said, Tiberius Caesar, son of the deified Augustus, who is also Augustus. And then on the other side of the coin was a phrase that declared Tiberius Caesar to be the high priest of the entire empire. Therefore, all Roman coins made the claim that Caesar was of divine origin and proclaimed him as the ultimate authority in the empire's state religion. The coin was blasphemy to the Jewish belief in the one holy God. But the coin was meant to be the means for the empire to remind the people of their religious loyalties as well as their civic responsibilities. Now, the fact that the Jewish religious leaders, the Pharisees, were even carrying such coinage showed that they were caught in their own trap. These coins were the currency of the empire, but they were forbidden to be used by pious Jews. And here were the religious authorities handling these coins. Well, we have to acknowledge that every society needs some kind of currency with which to buy and trade for the necessities of life. The more currency, the more things one is able to buy. And as long as we're able to earn our money honestly, and of course to pay our taxes, what's the problem? Well, there is a big problem. We need to remember that Jesus did not call money the root of all evil. He called the love of money the root of all evil. Pretty strong words. When Jesus said it was easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God, he was saying that there's something about material wealth that robs people of their spiritual inheritance as much as any sins of the flesh. There is something intrinsically seductive about money. And since the economy of our nation has everyone's attention nowadays, and since it really boils down to who has the money and who doesn't have the money, this is a good time for me to talk about the scariest drug on the market today. I'm not going to talk about narcotics. I'm not going to talk about illegal drugs, not about opium or cocaine or meth, not even marijuana. The drug I have in mind is the love of money. The love of money is addictive. It is habit forming. And studies have shown conclusively over many years that the more a person earns, the less proportionately he or she gives to charitable causes. The more we get, the less we give, figured as a percentage. As we earn more money, our ideas of so-called necessities begin to change. Outwardly, yes, we can still worship God, but inwardly, we begin to worship the material things that money can bring us. The love of money is, in fact, the most widely practiced religion in our country today. And even prominent Christian religious clergy have fallen down and worshiped this very popular idol. A test was recently given to a group of children to discover what characteristics of selfishness or generosity they had. Children of poor parents were found to be less selfish than children of wealthy parents. Children from large families were more generous than those from smaller families. Actually, this is not surprising. Among people that have little material wealth, sharing is a way of life for their survival. And as people gain more wealth, protecting what they have becomes the priority. And we begin to rationalize. Well, the poor are just lazy. They're unworthy. If I give them money, I'm just encouraging them to not get out there and earn it. I already pay too many taxes to take care of those bums. Any of this have a familiar sound today? All over this nation, that is what we are hearing, and slowly the jaws of the trap close around the addiction. The drug is working. And just like other drugs, the love of money also deadens our sensibilities. Just as Novocaine dulls our senses so that we can endure the dentist drilling in our mouth, Or just as alcohol dulls the senses so that we can go out and feel good and think we're having a lot more fun than we really are, so money can deaden our senses to other people, their conditions, and also our own God relationship. I ran across a very interesting little story the other day, I think, that exemplifies this. Once upon a time, there was a man who had absolutely nothing. So God gave him 10 apples. God said to eat 3 of the apples. Then use 2 of the apples to trade for shelter, and use 3 more apples to trade for clothing. The last apple God gave the man was to be given back to God for his gratitude for the other 9 apples. So the man went out, he ate 3 apples, he traded 2 of them for shelter, and traded 3 more apples for clothing, just as God had told him to do. But then the man looked at the 10th apple. That sucker looked bigger and juicier than those other 9 apples. Now he knew that God had given him that 10th apple so that he might return it out of gratitude for those other 9, but this last apple looked so much bigger and tastier than all those other apples. So the man began to reason that God had, he had plenty of apples in the rest of the world. God didn't really need this apple, at least not all of it. So the man ate the 10th apple and gave God back the core. There never seems to be enough money, does there? See, that's the addiction talking. Think of all the bills we have to pay. Yes, the taxes we owe the government. There's certainly material things that we'd like to have and places we'd like to go. Oh, and I almost forgot. I haven't mentioned that common phrase that churches are always asking for money. And this time of year, they are in the beginning or in the midst of annual stewardship campaigns. I was informed by your senior warden that you've already done your campaign for next year. And you've been asked to support paying down the mortgage on these beautiful buildings and to pay for the ministries, the programs, the expenses, and the salaries that keep this church doing God's work for the next year and the years beyond. So yes, the church does have to talk about money at certain times. Incidentally, keep this in mind as you call your next rector, it is a canonical requirement that clergy in charge of parishes in the Episcopal Church should and are required to preach and teach the practical and spiritual necessity of practicing good stewardship in our lives on a regular basis. So here's the bottom line. Whether it's paying taxes to the government or spending more time with your family or working longer and stressful hours to keep that job, or fulfilling your various commitments in and around the city, or, yes, supporting this church's mission and ministries by giving your time, talent, and treasure, there are a lot of things that compete on your life. The big question is, are you going to give back to God what's first and foremost really a gift from God in the first place? Or are you going to give God the core of whatever's left? Which leads me to this. Many people say, well, don't ask me to make a pledge to this church. I will give as I am able. And I think that exemplifies someone who is giving leftovers to God after satisfying his or her own needs and desires. Jesus never defined what things are that belong to God, but we acknowledge everything ultimately comes from God. But by asking the question about what image was on that coin, I think Jesus offers us an alternative question. Where do we find the image of God in our lives? To find that image, all you need to do is look in the mirror. Amen.